Hi everyone, and welcome to Science and Shiny with me, Shiny, and Jono. Unfortunately, Feltz can't be with us. He's off on a conference with a lot of really clever people. He's probably just getting a rest from having to talk to two fast bowlers, but hopefully he'll be back in the future. So, what we're going to do with this podcast is we're going to break down the Steve Finn podcast that we did recently, because hopefully there's going to be some useful information for people who may have bowlers that have just dropped a little bit of form at some point. Obviously, with Finney's, it was very well documented and it was over a long period of time. But in there, hopefully, Jono's going to take you through the process that he went through to get him from unselectable to playing back in the Ashes and having a fantastic, almost you'd say, re-debut when he took his wickets and just looked like an absolute world-class bowler. So what we're going to do is do that as a timeline. So the first thing, we're just going to refresh with what happened. So Jono, you obviously are working with Finney very closely because he was a Middlesex bowler at the time, and you worked with him, obviously from a young bowler through to getting into Middlesex's side, then England Lions. So what actually did you notice had happened?
It's quite difficult with your England players who are integral to the England side. So he was playing all formats, and he wasn't actually around the Middlesex team that much for that period of time. You stayed in contact with him via phone a lot of the time. He'd pop in now and again, but you didn't have a massive handle on that. The England sort of coaching team sort of led his performances and technical stuff, etc., etc. So it was more about watching from afar and seeing things happen. And I remember having obviously phone calls with you when he decided to shorten his run up, and he talks about it in the podcast, doesn't he? About how the reason why he shortened it, and the reason he puts it down to is the fact that because he was hitting the stumps, it was suggested to him that if he shortened his run up and ran quicker, the momentum would take him straighter and he wouldn't smash into the stumps, which, from afar, it looked like it had worked. He wasn't bowling that no ball with his knee touching the stumps. But we saw quite quickly that his attributes, the bits that made him good, the flow to his run up, the long levers that he has. We talk about these long levers. When you're 6'7", you've got this massive wingspan and long legs. You want to be using those to your advantage. And it looked like everything was just starting to shut down a little bit with that short run up. And I remember having, conversations with you and Angus Fraser, who, look, he references Gus a lot in the podcast. And Gus is one of those guys who he'll openly admit, not massively technically minded, but understands bowling as well as anyone from a practical point of view. And he could see how, his stride pattern was starting to shut down, his arms were starting to shut down. So these conversations had started even though he was still performing and doing okay. So it was quite a long process to go from that to actually where he ended up, I would say.
Yeah, so when we look at the characteristics of faster bowlers, and remember when Finney went into the side, he was a 90+ mile an hour bowler. He was the youngest, fastest bowler to 50 wickets, Test match wickets, and we had video of him, didn't we? When he was on his final one-day tour in the UAE against Pakistan, and there was a beautiful bit of footage that we kept referencing. And you and I are big believers in keeping your technical best piece of footage so that you've got something to go back to. And that's probably the first port of call, because when players do lose form, you've got to have something to reference, haven't you? So, yeah. Jono, what was your method when Finney actually became unselectable? What was your method to try and build his confidence?
Just firstly, on that bit you've just said about that one clip, what fascinated me after that was the amount of conversations and interviews I did where people felt that Steve was someone who, tinkered all the time and tried new things, and that he was overcoached, and I kept hearing this thing, overcoached. And I'm sitting there thinking, overcoached? All I've ever done, and what all of you've ever done, is take him back to that one clip of him as a natural source of beautiful long levers and bowling the ball at 93 miles an hour. So if that's overcoached, then we've got issues, because all we were doing was taking him back to that one clip. But yeah, so he comes back, and obviously, it's the lowest of low. I mean, that's a huge, huge story. A young fast bowler being so-called, unselectable, coming back to the country. So look, the first port of call really was me and you talking, and then you putting us together with Andy Flower, who was obviously in charge at the time with England, and having that conversation around what we'd seen and what our plan was moving forward about how we were going to help Finney. And we sat down to try and agree that round the table. And you were there with your England fast bowling hat on, weren't you, Shiny?
Yeah, so I obviously was a lead fast bowling coach at that point, and my last contact really with Finney was when he left to go and play for England, because he stayed with England for a fairly lengthy amount of time, quite rightly so. 90 plus miles an hour bowler. He had a natural away swinger, which we'll obviously touch on a little bit later, and he got incredible bounce, and he was aggressive, wasn't he? He had that real ability to be aggressive and very competitive. And I do remember that meeting, and obviously we had Andy Flower, who was the head coach and was obviously very concerned about Finney at the time. He wanted, a player of that ability back in the side. So you and I had to put together a lot of evidence based on the shorter run-up, what had started to happen. And because you and I are pretty much cut from the same cloth, we use a lot of video, but we use video generally to just make sure that we protect players' technique and game. And just for everybody out there, obviously there was some great research that was being done at the time, and it was from a PhD by a guy called Peter Worthington, and it was the characteristics of the fastest bowlers. And the biggest factor that Finney was losing was his bowling arm delay. Now, there were other points on the characteristics of fast bowling, so his release position was starting to change as well. But the biggest headline that Jono and I definitely noticed was at front foot contact, he was losing his bowling arm delay. So he was losing that ability to get his body to drive his bowling arm. This in turn, there's always a cascading effect.
And just quickly, sorry, and just for people who don't know, the delay is as your front foot lands. If you drew a line across your shoulders, it would be your bowling arm being lower than the line of the shoulders, yeah?
Yeah, correct. And if you think of there being a massive lag, and your body's able to stay in a position where it can strongly drive forward, and it will then really sort of power your bowling arm through. We know that's a stretch shortening cycle, and you're using masses of attributes that lead to free energy. And that just to lose that, you can lose many miles an hour, but you also lose feel, don't you? Because your whole timing, and we talked about a cascading effect, the timing effect is changing through all of your bowling. And remember, the most important thing about bowling fast is, can you get to the release point? So you've got maximum feel, so you can produce fantastic skill, because you've got to. You produce enough pace, and in Finney's case, that's high pace. Yeah, and you have control. And these are all super strengths of Finney. So going back to your method, Jono, to once again rebuild his belief, how did you start?
Strangely, the first thing was I got our analyst to put together a package for him showing all his best moments in an England shirt. So he had a clip that lasted about 3.5. I've still got it on my phone, actually, about 3.5, 4 minutes, to a bit of motivational music. And it just, him taking wickets, him sniffing people off, bowling 90 miles an hour, just to give him a good feel about what he has done and obviously where we're going to get back to. So that's the first point. Look, you're going through a tough time. Absolutely. Understand the person that you're talking to. Understand the psyche of that. Know that this is a good man and he's going to work hard, but give him some belief at the same time. This is where we're going to get back to. It's going to take some hard work, but this is the aim. This is where we're going. So he had that. And then we sat down and said, okay, look, let's take England off the table. Let's go above it. Let's go world's best. What does world's best look like? That's the aim. So we discussed 6'7", 90 odd miles an hour, can swing it away. right, world's best. Is there anyone else in the world at this time that can do that? Is there anyone in the world over the last 50 years of Test cricket that can do that? And there's not many, I can tell you that. So let's aim for that. Let's go for the big picture. Let's go for that. How are we going to do it? Right. So I think Finney mentioned quite a lot in the podcast where he was at such a low ebb. I mean, literally withdrawn. He didn't want to be in front of people. He didn't want people around him. So we were going in, I think we said about 7:15, something like that in the morning, before the members of public, even his best mates. He didn't want anybody watching him. So we're in there, crack of dawn, and going through the process. Firstly, just forget the run up. We know that's an issue, but we're literally going to go back to standing start in the side of a net, and we're going to bowl the ball into the side of the net, and we're going to get these arms going long again, because it got very short and very tight and feeling like he couldn't let go of the ball very well. So let's get those arms nice and long again. And we know that if you slow his best footage down at back foot contact, he's got a nice high front arm and his bowling hand is still very high at back foot contact. So let's start them in that position and then bowl it into the side netting. And it literally started with that.
So John, just hold it there for a second, because this is really, really important. Let's go back and reference, the research that's out there. And it's always good if you've got research, to try and, sometimes you've got to see the wood from the trees, haven't you? And you don't look at the position that the research suggests, and you sort of concentrate on getting that position right, because generally with cause and effect, it can come way before then. But you wanted to try and get his arms in a position that you felt, firstly, because you were having to give him ideas, weren't you? He was probably a little bit devoid of his own ideas. He tried to put it back and it wasn't happening. So you were having to logically now go back with him. Yeah. So you're almost reverse chaining. You're going before the actual delay to then get the feel and to match the video.
Yeah, absolutely. And Finney being Finney, he'll always look at stuff like that. And as long as you can give him the evidence-based stuff, so here you are at your best, here you are at back foot contact, here are your arms, watch what your arms do, they get long, they got a good delay, you release the ball. He knows all that, he's got video clips himself. So you go through it with him. So we're going to go through those positions, isolate those positions, and eventually it all comes together at the end. So we're going to work the arms first, we're going to get them in the right position. And even on a back foot starting drill, his arm would still be bent on the way down. We had to get him to push out. And I always say, even now, when you're doing these things, people call drills cones and hurdles and intervention poles and stuff like that. I call drills standing there and talking to someone and working out positions that that are good for you to get into. So we know that him pushing out and getting a long arm is how we want it. How do you do that? Repetition, video. Have you done it? No, I haven't. It's still bent. He'd get frustrated. Why is my arm bent? Well, okay, well, let's exaggerate the movement then. Let's really push up and out. That might not be how we end up. It won't be how we end up. But just get the feeling of that long arm coming down. And all of a sudden, piece by piece, bit by bit, it comes together.
So once you've got his arms to move, and bear in mind you were inside, you were starting this in the winter, weren't you?
Yeah, yeah.
You got his arms to move. What was your next part of the sequence?
So next bit, can we do that off a couple of paces? So now we're adding a little bit of momentum. And then straight away, that can now shorten again. Okay, well, what we'll do is we'll go back to the standing start. We'll do a few standing starts to warm up. Then maybe we'll do a standing start into the mitt. So we move it on a little bit. And then we go into a couple of paces. And then you build that up again. So next time you do the same again, and you do a few more off a couple of paces, and you start. And I suppose you want to move it on as quickly as you can, because what I think when we did our level 4 many moons ago, it was very much putting towards plans, wasn't it? So you got your plan. So for 2 weeks, I'm going to do this. For a week, I'm going to do that. For 3 weeks, I'm going to do that. And then all of a sudden, I've got a 6-week program, and I've got, we've solved that. What you learn when you coach is, well, actually, that first stage, you might not need to spend 2 weeks. That might be done in a couple of days. So your plan is actually, this is the first plan, but if he's completed that in a couple of days, let's move on. You can always go back again. So with him, it was always about moving forward, and then we go back again if we have to. So let's push him, but if it's not quite right, let's move back. And I found that with him off the short run up, he would revert a little bit, the arms would get short again, and I didn't want that feeling in his head. So we'd stop that. Right, go back to standing start. Let's get that right again. Now we do it off a pace. Now we do it off a couple of paces. Right, now we're starting to get that. Okay, we'll push back a little bit further. So it was a real gradual process. But the one thing I didn't want him to do, I didn't want him to have that feeling in his brain of that feeling short again. So as soon as it looks short, let's forget that. We'll go back a step and we'll go back to the 2 steps or 3 steps or whatever it was. And that took the process, because as soon as you ingrain that feeling again, it's a real difficult one to get rid of.
Yeah. And just out of interest, while you were doing this, were you watching what the ball was doing?
No. At that point, I wasn't bothered about the ball. At that point, I was only bothered about, can we get his arms in the right place? Can we get that feeling back? Because it's in there. We know it's in there. It's wired in there somewhere. We need to discover it again. So whether the ball hit the ceiling, the side netting, at that point, I wasn't not worried about that.
So we've reverse chained it from just getting the arms to flow and move and be long. You've gone to a standing start, couple of paces, and you're now trying to move back. Did you find any sticking points that you had to spend a little bit longer actually working it through? And how did you do that?
I mean, it's certainly indoors. It certainly wasn't right. No, it was better, absolutely 100% better, but it wasn't still right. It wasn't until we got outside and we got on some grass, and then we had that conversation about his run up, and that was the last little bit. We were looking at it going, we knew it was the run up at the start, but now it's the run up at the end. So we've got his arms working, but there's something in his run up doesn't look right. His stride pattern's not right. He hasn't got that rhythm, that bounce. His arms aren't flowing, and he still took his run up into his bowling action. So all that work you're doing on the bowling action is being undone a little bit by the run up. So how do we get this run up right? And look, me and you have played, a lot of cricket, and we know about run ups, but we don't necessarily know about running styles and how you get out of this tightness that you had. The shoulders were suddenly hunched up and it was all sort of jerky. And if you've ever seen Finney run, a 400 meters, he's one of the nicest, most rhythmical runners you can ever see. Put that ball in his hand and everything shut down. It was like, wow. And that's when you got Raf involved.
Yeah. So just a quick sort of recap of Raf. Raf Brandon was the head of science and medicine at the ECB. He was an international athletics coach, and people of note that he actually coached was Christina Huragu, who was a 400 meter runner. And Christine had obviously been out with us at some points during the PACE programme when we had people like Mark Wood there. Jimmy Anderson and Stuart Broad had come out for that particular and one when Raf was out there, and Christine was training in Potchefstroom in South Africa. And she actually did some running drills with the guys, which they really enjoyed. So we thought we're struggling here to actually, we sort of know what we were trying to say. We'd talk about rhythm, we'd have the bit of footage, but Finney couldn't connect with that, could he? So we brought in Raf. We'd shown Raf all of obviously the footage that we had, where he is now. And we said, look, can you help us? And he was absolutely clear that this, once again, had to be a breakdown. So going back to you then, John, we actually stood with Raf, didn't we, and Finney while he was doing these drills. And it was really interesting to watch, because it was when you had the tents up at Old Merchant Taylor's School. And it was very cold, sort of February, March, wasn't it? Frost on the ground. That Finney started to do some drills.
Yeah. And as he said in his podcast, he felt a bit of an idiot doing some of the drills, always with a cricket ball in his hand. But I thought that was brilliant from Raf. Even that small thing about having the cricket ball in his hands, so the reference point, because previously he'd be doing a run and feeling great, and then the cricket ball would go in and it all freeze up again. So actually do these drills with the cricket ball in your hand. And we saw, I mean, it took him a long time, don't get me wrong. It wasn't an overnight fix. He did quite a few sessions with him, but we started to see the difference in his run up. It started to flow again. His stride pattern got longer. His arms started to relax more. His shoulders started to go back down, and you could really see it starting to work. And again, you have to take your hat off to Finney. He worked so hard during that period to get back to where he wanted to be. And once that started working, and you could see in his run up it was working, that's when the swing stuff started to come in. Okay, look, your arms are in a good place now.
So hold on, Joe. Let's
sorry.
stop there, because there's a very clear point here that we couldn't go to the craft until we'd actually put the structure back in place, could we?
Yeah. Right.
And if we're going now and talking about, okay, so why do you do it that way round? Remember, to bowl swing is the ultimate skill. Once again, we've mentioned about the wobble seam before, but swing, when you are, obviously you put a grip in place, and that's your start point. But then you've got to get into a position at release when you've got your fingers, so grooved into a position, because you're trying to impart the energy onto the ball that gets the airflow reacting around the ball. That'll be a podcast that we do in the future when we look at the aerodynamics of swing. But it's such a feel thing, isn't it? And what we've known from when Finney his technique was starting to degrade is he was losing all ability to feel the ball. So he was losing control, not just of line and length, but also skill. So the skill of the coach and the skill of you working with him at that point is you were having to put bits in place, then test it. So you then start to have to look at the ball, wouldn't you? Well, what's it doing? Yeah. What sort of pace is it? Remember, Finney was a 90+ mile an hour bowler. What's his control like? Okay, so when did you actually make the decision that, okay, I feel the technique now is strong enough to be able to start to put to work or get to work?
Just before I get there, what you've just said there, I think is a really interesting point. I talk about this all the time in my coaching now. We as cricketers and sportsmen always look at the end goal. We're always looking at the result, the bit down there. Am I hitting the stumps? Am I bowling on a line length? Is it swinging? Is it bouncing? Oh, no, it's not. Oh, my God. And the world, falls apart. Well, when you're working on something specifically, if you're working on a front arm position or a delay or elbow into top of hip, whatever it is, whatever you're working on, take that bit out. It doesn't matter where the ball goes, because I need you to focus 100% on the one technical bit. Don't worry about the ball, because it's not going to come out brilliantly to start with, because you've got to fill that in. The better you get with the technical stuff, that will start to develop and that will get better. And at some point, we'll change the focus to where the ball is going and can you adjust your line, etc., etc. But you need to have that full focus on that technical bit. And that's what we did with Finney. And vaguely, I remember, and it's not 100%, but I vaguely remember it was basically at that time when he got his run up right, because I didn't see any point in doing skill stuff until he could confidently run up with a nice rhythmical action and get in really good technical positions that we knew we were working on and we were trying to achieve and deliver a ball. Once he could do that, that's when we started talking about the real craft of swinging the ball. And if we think about Finney and swing up to that point, we've got footage before then, before basically just as he'd played for England, possibly, if I remember, of him being able to swing the ball. I've got close up, beautiful seam presentation. He had a Jimmy Anderson-esque seam presentation on his swing. And he would shake the ball, he could wobble it, and he could wobble it big. So he had that skill to do all of that, and he never used it. And there's two reasons behind that. One, he never felt in total control of swing. And we've been there. We both went from not being able to swing the ball to swinging the ball. And it's a completely different feel. And it takes time to readjust to that feel. So he never felt in control of that swing. Plus, England didn't want him to swing it. They felt they already had swing bowlers, and they wanted him to hold it wobble and hit the bat hard and try and wobble it down the pitch. And I
Almost
thought
become
during
more of a nip back bowler, wasn't it?
yeah, absolutely. And we've had that conversation with Andy Flower. And this is not criticising anyone because that's what the plan was for England and that's what they wanted him to do. Fine. From our point of view, it was hard to see someone who could swing the ball at 90 odd miles an hour, which is very unusual. Um, it was hard for us to see him not even try it. So that was the whole point of this exercise was, okay, well, let's get you back to at least the minimum of where you were before. But now we're going to go a level above, and that's swinging it. And we're going to get you confident swinging it, and we're going to get you doing it at a high pace, at high skill level. And we couldn't do that. There was no way we could do that until all the other bits were in place.
Yeah. So let's go back to the point. So we'd had the sort of February, March time with Finney and working with Raf, doing all the drills, and then starting to test it. Obviously in the tent, it's brilliant because Middlesex had the tent there, and you had your pre-season games, and then you had the season. I remember the bits of footage because I was watching it obviously on MV Play. You would immediately tell me, look, have a look. I think this is now progress, and I'd keep coming to check in, wouldn't I? And my job was to check in and be cold eyes on it. You were absolutely emotionally invested. So was I, to be fair, because we love Finney. He was a great, not only was he a fantastic cricketer, he was a lovely, lovely guy, and he was in a bad place. So we were obviously trying to be as supportive as possible, but we knew my job was to make sure he got back to England as quickly as possible. I knew that I wasn't the ideal person to do that because I wouldn't spend as much time with him and I didn't have that history. And I also trusted you implicitly as a fast bowling coach to be able to do that work. But I think the useful thing was I was a cold set of eyes for you. You kept sending me footage or I'd come and visit. And I was very technical. And it was based on, well, okay, I'm seeing that, but I'm not seeing this. That's not the same as that bit of footage. What do you think we need to do here? So you and I would do that on our own. Then we'd deliver it back to Finney in a slightly less brutal way because he was making progress, wasn't he?
Yeah. You don't want to demotivate him. You don't want to push him back. It's a really hard, it's actually really difficult that period because you need to encourage the guy because, Finney takes things to heart, obviously, is at the lowest ebb he's ever been and he wants to get back. And there are times where he feels, we're making progress, but we're nowhere near, but you need to keep encouraging the progress. And then somehow you've got to word it right that, okay, we're still not there yet. We need to do this now and we need to do this now. And they're hard conversations, aren't they? And because he's such a winner and a perfectionist, everything had to be, he wanted it yesterday, and it took a long time and trying to pull him back and hold him back and keep pushing new things and different things onto him. It was hard work. That was hard work.
Yeah, now I can remember the times when I would come down and specifically you'd say, right, can you now do the session? Okay, away from me. So you walked off.
Yeah.
But we were now in skill terms, weren't we? So we were trying to actually now deliver the skill, which was my eyes would go to more the product that England wanted, which is the end product. So is it fast enough? Is it accurate enough? Does he have movement? Does he have bounce? Pace, bounce, movement, control. They're the sort of main things for consistent bowlers. And Finney was high skill in every single one of those when he was first with England. So we knew that, when it came to planning and moving him forward, we pretty much got to the consistency was back, wasn't it? The action was starting to stabilise. The bounce was there because he had that lovely, the release was getting higher, wasn't it? And he was getting into that really fantastic posture. The control was returning, but probably the movement was now the bit that we were trying to now go towards, which was, okay, England had him as a nip back bowler. You and I know that that's a reasonably easy skill. And I'm not, okay, I'm saying easy skill. It's a wobble ball generally, unless you're bowling a genuine off cutter, but that's something different, or a genuine in swinger. It was more of a wobble ball. You and I had already decided that, the ultimate skill being Jimmy Anderson-esque seam position, which we'd seen before. That was the bit we were going to try and promote, because if you can get that right, yeah, the rest will be easier, because that's the toughest skill. Then the sort of variation of just getting a little wobble on the seam, that's tiny. That's almost just a slight release
Yeah.
position or a grip change, isn't it? So how did you then go about, moving Finney into, right, Finney, I think we've got you in a position now where we can look at swing. How did those
Yeah.
conversations start and then move on?
Well, the great thing is at the start of the whole thing, that's what we'd agreed. So we were always, he agreed to trust his swing. Yes, I'm going to bowl swing. So that was the important thing right at the start. If he was like, well, I'm not sure, maybe let's see how we go, that's a different conversation. But it was, yes, I'm going to run in and I'm going to swing it. So once we got to that point, it's like, come on then, let's do it. Let's hold the ball upright and let's swing it. And again, it didn't happen overnight. It because you're used to wobble, and when you wobble, you pull your fingers down. You're looking to deliver the ball just outside off stump. Some will nip away, some will probably nip back in, and for him, more nip back in, so he could set his line a little bit wider, knowing that almost all balls are going to go back in to the right hander. But if you set your away swinger off that line, it's too wide. So he's got to adjust his line a little bit. And then once you start getting that feel of adjusting your line, all of a sudden, some of the things that can come in, you start getting a bit round arm because your fingers suddenly feel like they're behind the ball a little bit. And your brain starts going, oh, I want to swing this ball. Then you can get a little bit round the side of the ball. So one of the best drills for swing bowling, and we've used it a lot, haven't we, Shiny, is you put that set of stumps on about 6 meters. So if you think test match level, good lengths are 6 to 8 meters, depending on surface and height and type of bowler. So we would have a set of stumps showing one stump on around 6.5, 7 meters. And you put that stump down in your eye line and you put it on about off stump. And the idea is when you run up, you're looking at this stump, then you see the other set of stumps ahead of it. And the idea is to swing the ball around that stump. And all that does is gives you the visual, and then you adjust your body slightly to be able to get that feeling of swinging around that stump on a good length. And that drill, I still use. I think it's a brilliant drill to use. And that's the bit that got him in the groove of getting that nice line and swinging the ball. And the thing is with Finney, as soon as he started to get it and the line started to come tighter and the feeling of the ball off the fingers, there's no better feeling. That ball fizzing off your fingers, 90 miles an hour, swinging. Because when you swing the ball, your fingers feel like they're on the ball that touch longer rather than just pulling off it early and it wobbling. So you feel like you've got more behind it. And it's a great, beautiful feeling when it lands perfectly. And then you introduce a batter down there to put a bit more pressure on. And all of a sudden, you beat the outside edge a couple of times and his mates would be going to him, oh, you just swung now. What was that? Because they hadn't seen him do it. And it made him feel good.
Yeah.
So it was a real slow build up again, one without a batter and then introducing a batter. And then we move on to the pre-season games. And now all of a sudden there's a little bit more pressure. And I remember playing a pre-season game at Merchant Taylors against Surrey, which I think again Finney referenced in the podcast, and that nervousness suddenly came over him. So now we built the confidence to do it in front of all his mates, bowling in nets and swinging it and feeling great. But all of a sudden we've got Surrey there, Merchant Taylors, and they're all out in the middle having a bowl through. And he came to me and he said, I don't want to bowl out there, Johnny. I said, right, okay. Well, what do you want to do? He said, we'll go to the marquee. And the marquee was still up pre-season. So we went over in his whites and he did his warm-up in the marquee away from everybody. At that point, he's still not doubting, but there's that like fragility around the pressure and the performance and stuff. And And do you know what? Bless him. He literally he was so nervous. And I said to him, "You're going to hold it seam up, aren't you?" And he went, "Yeah, I'll hold it seam up." And he stood there in that first ball and he held it seam up and it swung. And then the process started to widen again. You know, he started to build confidence again.
So I'm going to go back over the recap eventually, but what you're talking about there is you were basically layering on different levels of pressure.
Yeah,
And
that's it.
the most important thing is you were listening to your player. And when he wasn't ready, you'd go, "That's fine, absolutely fine. Let's just carry on doing what we're doing." And that's
Yeah,
the important thing. And actually, all credit to Flower. Flower was never in a rush. He
yeah.
probably was, but he realised with the explanation that we'd given him, with the evidence that we'd given him, that this wasn't going to be an easy fix. It was going to take a bit of time. And he never actually put a timeline on it, but we kept him up to date. But I never ever felt that Finney was being pressured to be backed by Flower at any point. So that gave
I
us
think that's
time.
it's a really important point about listening to the player. I mean, we all have our ideas in our head about coaching, and we might have something in our brain that says, "No, we want to move to this." But as we said earlier as well, if you move too quickly and you're not listening to the player when he's not ready, or you're not seeing that he's not ready, it's so important that you've got to give that time. Otherwise, you're undoing all the good work that you've already put in.
Yeah, yeah. And there comes a time when you've got to push him as well, though, doesn't it? Can you remember that time when you had to actually say, "Finney, I now think you're ready. Come on, mate, go
Yeah.
for it."
Do you know what? I think it was actually probably the first championship game, because he played 2 or 3 pre-season friendlies. He'd built up that, feeling of pressure again. But it was a big moment for him to suddenly jump from that into first class cricket after a couple of games. And it was that classic, I'm not sure I'm ready, I'm not sure. And you're like, yeah, you are, mate. Like, look at what you've just done in the past 2 warm-up games. Look at what you've done in the nets. Listen to all your mates. They're all saying you're bowling brilliantly, mate. We've got the video evidence. Look at the video. You're in the positions that you want to be in. The ball's coming out well. It's okay, mate. You can do it now. And that was probably the bit. And then again, he stood at the top of his mark in that first championship game, and he was like, shall I go seam up, or I was like, you are going swing.
Yeah, and that's that sort of leap of faith that you've got to take, isn't it? You've got to trust
Yeah.
what you're doing. Do you know what? It doesn't matter if it doesn't work then. You can always go back to it. So let's just go back to and just try and summarise. The Finney from being where he was, 90 plus miles an hour, high release point, fantastic control, amazing bounce and skill. He could swing the ball or seam the ball at will, and that was proven by how quickly he got into Test match cricket. So the first piece of absolute advice we give you on the recap is keep really great video records of when your player's
100%.
at his best.
100%.
Make sure you've got the how they got to there, and that's something that Jono you probably used brilliantly, because it was actually relentless. I remember when you and I were talking, I'd say, "Well, hold on, I'm not quite sure you got that bit yet." "Yeah, okay, well, let's keep working." And you would once again keep your records of how close it was to there. So the first thing you did was build belief with your motivational video that the analysts
Yep.
put together, which is
Yep.
reminding Finney where he was. And we know that visualization is a really, really powerful tool. And once again, on the future podcast, I'm hoping that we're going to get Chris Marshall, who's an amazing sports psych, who's big on visualization and belief, and we can really tap into that, because that's huge for fast bowling coaches to be able to tap into different specialists. Then you took the reverse chaining approach, didn't you? Which your decision was, because you'd always seen Finney's biggest headline was his flowing arms, his big arms. So that was the first part. You moved it on once he got that part of the sequence. So whether it was the standing drill, whether it was the walk through drill, whether it was the walk to jump gather, or the quarter run, half run, you wouldn't just spend loads of time at a low level.
No.
Then
You'd move it on, but if he wasn't ready, you'd move it back.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the important thing. You can't just keep moving it on if he's not getting it, because you're just keeping all those bad feelings in there. So if he's not getting it, don't be afraid to go back again.
So
Right,
the
let's go
key
back to
was
this. It's not a problem.
patience, wasn't it,
Yes.
from the coach?
Yeah.
Patience.
Yeah.
But also the Finney, you're getting there now. You know, let's not just have a session because it looks good and we all feel good,
Yeah.
but you know that's not what the finished article needs to look like, because you do have to push them on and get them ready to go. Then there was the massive roadblock, which was his run up. That you and I, we didn't really know how to do it. We could talk about rhythm, etc. So we brought in a specialist, didn't we? A specialist who understood the mechanics of running, asked great questions of us as to what it needed to look like and feel like. And then he started to put together the running drills that completely complemented what we were trying to do when we got to final step before jump gather into his action, which you and I know as stability, balance, controlling momentum, and then being able to control the ground and how we use those forces for the ground to deliver the skill. We didn't actually have the knowledge and the skill at that time to give Finney back, that beautiful rhythmical gait that he had, the beautiful sort of non-rocking balance that he had when he was getting into his bowling action, which is when some really strange stuff starts to happen when you're on one leg, one arm's up in the air, you've got all these amazing rotations going on. So once you got past that bit, it was then the layering on the pressure, which you did, firstly with batters, introducing batters, but in safe net situations. Then when everyone was around to watch and you were encouraging him to go with his new skill, then you went into matches. And tell me, when you went into the first round of matches that he played, was it smooth? Was it a smooth improvement curve, or was there a little bit of a drop back?
There was a little bit of a drop, which disappointed him. Not massive, just slight, just nervous energy. Still a bit anxious about it all. But that went pretty quickly. I think maybe second game, or he eased it back into it. It might have even been second innings of the first game. I think that first bowl was always going to be, can you just get out there? Can you just deliver something? It doesn't have to be world class. You just need to get over this hurdle. And once he got over the hurdle, actually an arm around him, and it'd been a bit down. I didn't bowl as well as that. No, mate, but come on. Look where you've come from. Look what you've done. Look at the positions. They're good. They're good. Yes, they could be slightly better, but wow. Like, come on. Pat yourself on the back for once. You know what I mean? Like, you know what he's like. So,
Absolutely.
So, it was still a slow process once we were in the games, but he started to pick up wickets. And as you know, as any fast bowler, if you're a bit down, but you can start picking up a few wickets, it's amazing how your confidence builds. The positions got better, the rhythm got better, the nerves got less, and it just started to flow really nicely for him. Yeah. Really nicely.
So we know he obviously started to do well enough in county cricket that he then got picked again for England. It was in an Ashes series, home series. We obviously explained it in the podcast. Finney obviously spoke about it, with the ball swinging and he got his wickets. After that, so obviously there was the euphoria of, wow, I'm back.
Yeah.
How disciplined then was Finney with regards to making sure that he kept repairing and kept getting better?
He's always disciplined. He's the one positive and downside at the same time that Finney has, and he openly admits this himself, is he is an absolute perfectionist. And it got to the point where he wanted every ball to fly out of his fingers, swinging away at good pace, and beating the outside edge or nicking the bat. And when it didn't, he struggled with that a little bit, and that built up over a period of time. And then I don't know the time scale on this one, but then he got to a point where he went back to the wobble again, didn't he? Because he didn't trust that swing again.
Yeah.
And that was a tough time actually, because that was the bit that he started getting those feelings back again, which again he talks about in his book and his podcast about the feelings of not being in control again. And Finney had this big thing about control. I need to be in control. And when that swinging ball, and I always explain Finney's swing, you would explain it as well, Shiny, where there's two types of away swing bowlers. there's one classical where you see it out the hand and the wrist is always that side of the ball to swing the ball. It's always that side. Whereas Finney's was always off a little bit. It always looked like, from a batter's point of view, it would look like it was coming into you.
Yeah.
But then he would just wrap his finger around and get the ball to shake away. So that's the best type of swing that you can get, is the batter's facing and it feels like the angle and everything's coming in, but then he gets the swing away. And
Well,
he had that.
you actually had the same same setup, and that's why we wanted to give you an in swinger, because
Yes.
your in swinger looked the same as your away swinger. Besides the fact you had this ridiculous orange grip rather than
Terrible
that, like
Awful
that.
grip. Awful grip.
But
hand grenade.
the actual one of the reasons why we thought if we can get you a good in swinger, you couldn't tell the difference because you did have the sort of slight sort of just fall away.
And mine,
get it going.
mine wasn't developed. It was because as a young kid, I couldn't swing the ball away. Everything went in, so my wrist position naturally was that side of the ball. And then I'm sure we'll talk about it when we talk about swinging in another podcast. But from that position, I learned how to swing the ball. So yes, I had that advantage of it feeling like it was going in and then shaping away. And Finney had exactly that.
Yeah.
What Finney found really hard was now and again when he got his action slightly off, because his fingers were that side, it would stay that side, and he wouldn't have that little flick off the last finger, and it would go down leg side. And he struggled with that. He hated the feeling of that ball going down leg side. And I would say to him, but that's one out of 18. Yeah, but I can't control it. I can't control it.
Let's go back to the, why do we encourage swing? Because if you had equipment that was sensitive enough to see really, really small technical or energy changes, and what I'm talking about energy is when you start to use the ground, and you start to see the energy come up and what side of the fingers or the wrist or the arm or the body, if you had something that showed that, an in-swinger would look very different to an away swinger. I think, Jono, you and I, because we did learn to swing it, you had to when we played. It was sort of something you really had to do.
Especially playing at Taunton.
Pardon? Yeah, exactly. But you know that you'd be just getting on slightly different positions to get your wrist in the right place, but still propel the ball forward with enough pace to be competitive. And that's the bit when you're working with your players. If you were to say your super skill is that ball, then work around that to get them there, but always take them back to their super skill. Work out what. Now that super skill may be that they can't swing a ball, and there's probably lots of theories around why people can't swing balls, and that's for another podcast. But we knew Finney did have that super skill, didn't he? Because he did it from a young age. And you've just given a great piece of info there, which is even with that weird grip, you were able to swing it away and in. So you obviously were able to stabilise yourself. And once again, go back to your coaching when you're working with your younger players. The first time you set eyes on them, really work hard to understand what their best ball is. And then get that. Don't then just try and think about what you think they should have. Go with their strengths. Maximise them first, then see if you can work the skills around them. And once again, that would be a different podcast when we talk about, so how do you coach an in-swinger if you're mainly an away swing bowler and vice versa? Because with regards to how actions look, there are plenty of people out there who've got actions that look like it's a massive in-swinger, but they can get the thing to swing away. Let's talk about Josh Tong at the time. Josh Tong is way beyond the perpendicular. He's got one of the best away swingers there is. So, that sort of convention, if you are beyond the perpendicular and it looks like you push the ball in, you should bowl an in-swinger. No, observe it, look at it and see what they do. Then as a coach, work the other skills around those. And I think that's the bit of coaching that probably works so well for Finney, is even though you knew it was his away swinger you wanted to get back to, you put the structure in place first. So through your reverse chaining, through going to RAF to get him balanced so that he could then create the positions and the force to get the ball down there at 90 plus, but also get it to move. Oh, and funnily enough, you've still got to hit that little dinner plate, because it's, you know, it's a game that requires accuracy as well. So you're trying to put loads of things together there. John, I think that's, you know, that's a fantastic insight into what was a great piece of work. It was lovely to see Finney actually publicly thank you for that. You know, it's not what we're in the job for, but it was really, really nice for that to happen. So, you know, I think that's something that, from a coaching perspective, there's some nice little technical pieces in there for people. And remember, our aim is to simplify what could be seen as quite tricky, i.e. technique. You know, we are talking about there with Finney, it was balance when he was going into his action. We knew he was a long flowy bowler, so it was a bowler type. Okay, and then we were looking at making sure that he could get into a great position to produce his skill. So, Jono, thanks very much for that.
So if you're interested in working with us, whether that's through coaching, analysis, or the PaceFlow integration, head to the website. We'll put the link in the description, or feel free to reach out via our YouTube channel or socials. We'll also be continuing our shorter tech talk episodes, breaking down specific parts of fast bowling. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.